suppose most of the people who have sat in Memorial Stadium look down at the north end zone and see Zuppke Field have absolutely no idea who Bob Zuppke was.
Bob Zuppke was a legend. He coached the Galloping Ghost and changed the way the game was played. He was the most successful coach in Illinois history. Bob Zuppke was also an artist. He painted hundreds of paintings over his lifetime and gave most of them away. They ended up in private collections, hidden away from the public. Then the University of Illinois Alumni Association put together a display of his work.
There were a lot of them around town, so we thought it would be a good idea to bring them together in one place where people could come and see them for the first time in decades.
A lot of his paintings, they had a smooth look. He would soften all the edges. I think that's really a unique style that he did, and it's very cool.
The paintings are beautiful. They're like amazing. I can't imagine a football coach painting.
You have the stereotype that artists don't like sports. And so to find that a guy who was one of the greatest football coaches was as passionate about painting as he was about football is pretty shocking.
Art is very professionalized now. Certainly football is very professionalized now. There's not a lot of room to do other things.
In Zuppke's day, sports were seasonal. When the last football banquet was over and the football players hung up their cleats, he was free until spring practice.
During the off-season, Zuppke and his wife Fanny would leave Champaign in search of warmer weather.
Zuppke loved to travel because it enabled him to make art.
He didn't paint a lot on site.
He would start by doing the painting in charcoal, and then he would fill it in with oil.
Said that he often turned out a painting in 4 hours. He was very, very fast.
Zuppke, he always said that he liked color more than technique.
So rather than give us a photographic representation of the landscape, but perhaps also how it would have felt to him. I'm particularly taken with his paintings of football players. That's a clear challenge. Representing bodies and muscle and grit and faces that are bound up. They convey energy, they convey this kind of physicality, and for me it shows that he was an artist.
Robert Zuppke showed a talent for art even as a child growing up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. His parents were part of the city's sizable German immigrant community.
They were a typical German middle-class family of the time. They appreciated art and music.
In high school, Zuppke used his talents to illustrate his school yearbooks. At the University of Wisconsin-Madison, Zuppke played basketball despite his stature.
Zuppke was short, 5'7", 147 pounds, feisty. I'd compare him to a Jack Russell Terrier.
Zuppke's size kept him from making the Badger football team, but he was able to train with the squad as a practice player.
He was a student of the game, as opposed to somebody that's intimately involved on the field. He could see the big picture.
After graduation, Zuppke headed to New York.
He was going to be a commercial artist. One of the big clients was a furniture company, and he did lots of illustrations for the furniture catalog, line drawings with buxom Gibson girls standing behind overstuffed chairs.
Football called him back to the Midwest. In 1910, he took a job as a high school coach in Oak Park, Illinois. That fall, Zuppke's team lost their first game. They never lost again for 3 seasons. Colleges across the country were knocking on his door.
He was being courted by other Big Ten universities, such as Northwestern and Purdue, at higher salaries than what Illinois had offered.
Illinois Athletic Director George Huff persuaded Zuppke to come to Illinois. He was a former football player and shared Zuppke's view on its lessons of sportsmanship.
Zuppke looked at football as an educational tool to give his players courage and perseverance, and to use all these things that they cultivated on the football field after college in their careers and their life after football.
At first, the Illinois players didn't know what to make of this little man who had beer and onions for breakfast, but he quickly won them over.
So Zuppke was a very colorful character. He was a rapid-fire talker. He was a bit of a philosopher. He told stories through free association.
if you run hard and carry your knees high and don't crawl and sneak around out there, you've got a good chance to win.
Zuppke used colorful sayings to motivate players. They were known as Zuppkeisms.
Don't despise the little guy. Champions come in all sizes. Sportsmanship is the golden rule in one word.
Because they were instructional like that, players could remember them and then use them in their daily life.
Zuppke inherited an Illinois team that had finished in the middle of their conference. By his second season as coach, Illinois was undefeated and they had won their first national championship. As the Illinois team started winning, more people were flocking to the games. 14,000 fans crowded into Little Illinois Field. Zuppke told his team to come in close and huddle around the quarterback so they could hear the plays over the noise of the crowd, and a football tradition was born.
The effect of that, though, was that it got the offensive line cued into what the play was going to be. It made the whole play more efficient because everybody knew what was going to happen.
Huff and Zuppke capitalized on the football team's success by raising over $1 million to fund a new stadium. In 1924, the new Memorial Stadium was dedicated at a sold-out game against undefeated Michigan. By the end, Michigan had their first defeat of the season, and the country had a new star.
Red Grange, if you handed him a football, he was unstoppable.
You can just imagine the excitement, 60,000 people, at a time when the population of Champaign-Urbana couldn't have been more than 25,000.
One of the most interesting things about Zuppke's contribution to football is the role that he had in popularizing college football and making it into big business. We got this big stadium here, we started to fill it to capacity, people were really excited about the football team, we were making money. Then other schools started building big stadiums and doing the same thing, and it just took off.
As the sport grew, Zuppke's players were lured away to professional teams.
Zuppke felt betrayed. He's really been out of shape for many years. Felt like professional football went against what he thought football should be.
In the 1930s, Zuppke's winning streak seemed to be over.
Other schools were aggressively recruiting high school players, and that's just something Zuppke didn't believe in. He thought that you should take the kids who show up on the first day of practice and then turn them into a team. And his team started getting worse and worse and worse.
In 1941, Zuppke retired from Illinois. He coached for a season at the University of Havana in Cuba. There he attended the wedding of a former student from Oak Park, Ernest Hemingway.
We do know that Zuppke said that he thought that Hemingway, the way he was built, he would have been a good football player.
Zuppke returned from Cuba with dozens of paintings and sketches. He wrote a thank you letter to Hemingway that included a portrait of his host. Zuppke continued to pursue his passion for art until he died in 1957.
Some people have suggested that painting was a hobby. I don't think he viewed it as a hobby. I think he viewed that as part of his self.
And that these two interests of his were actually necessary to the development of body and spirit and mind that he so valued.
He said that just as in painting how you would use dabs and swabs of color to create your end product, in football you would have a conglomeration of men in motion, and that in those two ways a painting was a creation and so is a football team.